Lisa wiped down the red vinyl booth for the third time that afternoon, her tired eyes scanning the nearly empty diner. The lunch rush had ended hours ago, leaving only the usual regulars nursing their coffee and the occasional traveler stopping for directions. She tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear and glanced at the clock above the kitchen door. 3:30. Almost. Time for the school kids to start trickling in for their after-school snacks. That's when she noticed her a small girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sat in the corner booth by the window. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper brush in days, and she wore a faded pink sweater that was clearly too big for her tiny frame. The sleeves hung past her wrists, and there was a small hole near the left shoulder that had been carefully mended with mismatched thread. Lisa approached the table with her notepad ready. "Hi there, sweetie. What can I get you today?" The girl looked up with the biggest brown eyes Lisa had ever seen. They seemed too old for such a young face, carrying a weight that made Lisa's heart skip a beat. "Just water, please," the girl said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just water?" Lisa asked, glancing around the diner. "Are you waiting for someone? Your mom or dad, maybe?" The girl shook her head quickly. "No, just me. Water is fine." Lisa noticed the way the girl's eyes kept darting toward the kitchen, where the smell of fresh-baked apple pie and grilled cheese sandwiches filled the air. Her stomach made a small rumbling sound, and she quickly pressed her hands against it, looking embarrassed. "You sure you don't want anything else? We've got some really good soup today," Lisa offered gently. "I don't have money for soup," the girl admitted, looking down at her hands. "Water is free, right?" Lisa's chest tightened. She had seen plenty of struggling families come through the diner in her 3 years working there. But something about this little girl hit her differently. Maybe it was the way she tried so hard to look invisible, or how she clutched a worn backpack like it contained everything she owned in the world. "Of course water's free, honey," Lisa said, forcing a smile. "I'll be right back." As she walked to the drink station, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the girl. She filled a large glass with ice water and grabbed a few extra napkins, her mind racing. When she returned to the table, she found the girl had pulled out a wrinkled homework sheet and was pretending to work on math problems with a pencil stub that was barely 2 inches long. "Here you go," Lisa said, setting down the water. "What grade are you in?" "Third," the girl replied, still looking at her paper. "I'm Sophie. Nice to meet you, Sophie." "I'm Lisa." She paused, watching as Sophie took small sips of water like she was trying to make it last as long as possible. "You know, I always do better on homework when I have a little snack. Helps my brain work better." Sophie looked up hopefully, but then her face fell. "I told you I don't have any money." Lisa glanced around the diner. Her manager, Frank, was in his office doing paperwork, and the cook was taking a smoke break out back. The other waitress had gone home an hour ago. Making a quick decision, Lisa leaned down closer to Sophie. "You know what? Someone ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and then changed their mind. It's just going to go to waste otherwise. You'd actually be doing me a favor by eating it." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Lisa said, even though she knew she'd be paying for that sandwich out of her own pocket. "I'll be right back." In the kitchen, Lisa quickly made a grilled cheese sandwich and heated up a small bowl of tomato soup. She rang it up on her own tab, watching her meager tip money disappear from her mental budget. But when she saw Sophie's face light up as she placed the food in front of her, Lisa knew she'd made the right choice. "Thank you so much," Sophie whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I was really hungry." Lisa's heart broke a little more. "Eat up, sweetie. Take your time." As Sophie ate, Lisa noticed things that worried her even more. The girl's shoes had holes in them, and she could see Sophie's socks through the worn spots. Her jeans were too short and had patches on both knees. Most concerning of all, Sophie ate like she hadn't had a proper meal in days, taking small bites and chewing slowly, like she wanted to make it last forever. "This is the best grilled cheese I've ever had," Sophie said between bites. "I'm glad you like it," Lisa replied, refilling Sophie's water glass. "Do you come here often after school?" Sophie nodded. "Sometimes, when I don't want to go home right away. It's nice and quiet here." Lisa wanted to ask more questions, but something in Sophie's tone warned her to be careful. Instead, she just smiled and let the girl eat in peace. When Sophie finished every last crumb and drop of soup, she carefully folded her napkin and placed it next to her empty bowl. "Thank you again," she said, sliding out of the booth. "That was really good." "You're very welcome," Lisa said. "Maybe I'll see you again tomorrow?" Sophie's face brightened. Maybe. After Sophie left, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about her. She found herself looking out the window, watching the small figure walk down the street with her oversized backpack bouncing against her legs. Something wasn't right about the whole situation, but Lisa couldn't put her finger on exactly what. The next Tuesday, Sophie appeared again at exactly the same time. This time she ordered water and pulled out a different homework assignment. Lisa didn't hesitate. She made another excuse about leftover food and brought Sophie a turkey sandwich and a glass of milk. This pattern continued for 3 weeks. Every Tuesday, Sophie would show up looking a little thinner, a little more tired. Her clothes became more wrinkled, and Lisa noticed that she sometimes fell asleep at the table while pretending to do homework. During the 4th week, Lisa decided to take a bigger risk. She started packing extra sandwiches from home, telling Frank that customers had ordered food and then left before picking it up. She used her own lunch money to pay for Sophie's meals, and sometimes she went without eating herself just to make sure the little girl had enough. Other customers began to notice Sophie too. Some would smile at her, others would whisper among themselves, but Sophie seemed oblivious to the attention, focused only on her homework and the warm meals that Lisa continued to provide. Lisa knew she was breaking diner policy. Frank had made it clear that giving away free food was grounds for immediate termination, but every time she saw Sophie's grateful smile, every time she watched the girl's thin shoulders relax after a warm meal, Lisa knew she couldn't stop. She just hoped she could help Sophie before someone found out what she was doing. It was a particularly busy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Lisa was rushing between tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups, when she heard a loud thud from the corner booth. She turned around to see Sophie collapsed on the floor, her small body crumpled next to the table like a discarded doll. "Oh my God, Sophie." Lisa dropped her coffee pot and rushed over, kneeling beside the unconscious girl. Sophie's face was pale as paper and her breathing was shallow. Lisa could feel her heart pounding as she gently shook the girl's shoulder. "Sophie, honey, can you hear me?" Other customers had noticed the commotion and were starting to gather around. Frank came running out of his office, his face worried. "What happened? Should I call an ambulance?" "Give me a second," Lisa said, carefully lifting Sophie's head and placing it on her lap. The girl's skin felt cold and clammy. Lisa had seen enough struggling families to recognize the signs. "Sophie, sweetie, wake up for me." After what felt like forever but was probably only 30 seconds, Sophie's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused and scared, trying to sit up too quickly. "Whoa, slow down," Lisa said gently, helping her into a sitting position. "Just breathe for a minute. When's the last time you ate something?" Sophie looked around at all the worried faces staring down at her, and her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I just got dizzy, but Lisa wasn't buying it." She helped Sophie back into the booth and brought her a glass of orange juice and a piece of toast with peanut butter. As Sophie slowly ate, Lisa sent Frank back to his office and shooed away the curious customers. When they were alone, she sat down across from Sophie. "Honey, I need you to be honest with me," Lisa said quietly. "When did you last have a real meal? Not just what I've been giving you here on Tuesdays." Sophie stared at her toast, picking at the crust. "I had some crackers yesterday morning." Lisa's stomach dropped. "That's it? Just crackers?" Sophie nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Sometimes I find other stuff at home, but Grandma Rose forgets to go shopping. She forgets a lot of things lately." This was the first time Sophie had mentioned anyone at home. Lisa leaned forward, trying to keep her voice calm and gentle. "Tell me about Grandma Rose. Is she taking care of you?" "She tries," Sophie said quickly, like she was defending her grandmother. "She's really nice and she loves me a lot. She just gets confused sometimes. Like she'll make 3 cups of tea and forget to drink any of them. Or she'll put her keys in the refrigerator and spend all day looking for them." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "Where are your parents, Sophie?" Sophie's face crumpled a little and she took a shaky breath. "They died in a car accident when I was 6. Grandma Rose is my mom's mom. She's the only family I have left." The pieces were starting to come together, and Lisa didn't like the picture they were forming. An elderly woman with what sounded like dementia, trying to raise a young child on her own. No wonder Sophie was always hungry and her clothes were in such poor condition. "Does anyone else help you and your grandmother? Social workers, neighbors, anyone?" Sophie shook her head. "Grandma Rose doesn't like strangers coming to the house. She gets scared when people knock on the door. She thinks they're trying to take me away. Lisa's heart was breaking. Sweetie, what about school? Are your teachers worried about you? I try really hard to be good at school, Sophie said, her voice getting smaller. But sometimes I can't think straight when I'm hungry, and the letters on the page get all fuzzy. My teacher, Mrs. Peterson, she's nice, but I don't want her to know about Grandma Rose forgetting things. What if they take me away from her? That evening, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about Sophie. She went home to her own small apartment and looked at her own 7-year-old son, Danny, doing his homework at the kitchen table. She watched him complain about having to eat his vegetables at dinner, and she thought about Sophie fainting from hunger. The next day, Lisa made a decision. She cooked extra food for dinner and packed it in containers. On Wednesday afternoon, she waited outside Sophie's school with the food containers in a bag. Sophie was surprised to see her. Lisa, what are you doing here? I brought you and your grandmother some dinner, Lisa said simply. I made too much again. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do that. I want to, Lisa said. Can you show me where you live? Sophie hesitated, then nodded. They walked 6 blocks to a small, run-down house with peeling paint and a front yard full of weeds. Sophie led her up the creaky front steps and opened the door. Grandma Rose? Sophie called out. I brought a friend home. An elderly woman appeared from the kitchen, looking confused and a little frightened. She had the same brown eyes as Sophie, but they seemed cloudy and uncertain. She was wearing a bathrobe even though it was the middle of the day and her gray hair was messy. Who is this person, Sophie? She asked, backing away slightly. This is Lisa, Grandma. She's my friend from the diner. She brought us dinner. Lisa smiled warmly and held up the bag of food. Hello, Mrs. Rose. Sophie talks about you all the time. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Something in Lisa's gentle tone seemed to calm the older woman. Oh, well, that's very kind of you, dear. Though I'm not sure we have enough food to share. Actually, I brought food for you, Lisa explained, following them into the kitchen. The sight made her heart sink. The refrigerator was nearly empty except for a carton of milk that smelled sour and some wilted lettuce. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, and there were at least 6 empty teacups scattered around the counter. Lisa unpacked the containers of homemade soup, sandwiches, and fresh fruit. I always cook too much, she said cheerfully. It would just go to waste otherwise. As they ate, Lisa watched the interaction between Sophie and her grandmother. It was clear that Rose loved Sophie deeply, but she was struggling. She would start sentences and forget how to finish them. She asked Sophie the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. When Sophie gently reminded her of things, Rose would look embarrassed and confused. After dinner, Lisa helped Sophie with her homework while Rose dozed in her chair. She was amazed to discover that despite everything, Sophie was incredibly smart. She understood complex math problems and read at a level far above her grade. But her homework was often incomplete, and her handwriting was shaky from weakness and hunger. You're really good at this, Lisa told her as Sophie solved a multiplication problem that would challenge most 5th graders. I like learning, Sophie said. But sometimes I can't concentrate at school, and I don't always have time to finish my homework because I have to help Grandma Rose remember things. Before she left, Lisa knelt down to Sophie's level. Sweetie, I want to help you and your grandmother. Would it be okay if I came by a few times a week? Maybe brought some groceries and helped with dinner? Sophie's face lit up, but then she looked worried. What if people find out that Grandma Rose needs help? What if they say she can't take care of me anymore? Lisa took Sophie's small hands in hers. We'll figure it out together, okay? I promise I won't let anyone take you away from your grandmother, unless it's absolutely necessary for your safety. As Lisa walked home that night, she knew she was getting in deeper than she had planned. But looking at Sophie's grateful smile and seeing Rose's confusion, she also knew she couldn't walk away. This little girl and her grandmother needed help, and somehow, Lisa had become their lifeline. Robert Mitchell sat in his usual corner booth at the diner, staring at his untouched coffee and trying to blend in with the worn vinyl seats. For the past month, he'd been coming here almost every day, always wearing the same faded jeans and plain gray hoodie. Nobody knew that the tired-looking man nursing black coffee was actually the CEO of one of the country's largest tech companies. He wasn't here for the food, though the apple pie wasn't bad. He was here because this was the kind of place his 16-year-old daughter Chloe might end up. 3 months ago, After another explosive fight about her behavior and his long work hours, Chloe had packed a bag and disappeared into the night. The police had been no help. Private investigators had found a few leads, but nothing solid. So Robert had started doing what he probably should have done years ago. He began looking for her himself. Every day after leaving the office, he would drive through different neighborhoods, checking homeless shelters, community centers, and places like this diner where runaway kids might try to get a cheap meal or stay warm. He'd learned to dress down to avoid drawing attention. The last thing he wanted was some news reporter recognizing him and turning his family crisis into a headline. That's how he first noticed the waitress with brown hair and tired eyes. Lisa, he'd heard other customers call her. She worked harder than anyone he'd ever seen, always moving, always helping someone. She reminded him a little of his ex-wife in her younger days before the divorce, before everything fell apart. But it was the little blonde girl who really caught his attention. The first time Robert saw Sophie, she was sitting alone at a table, pretending to do homework while stealing glances at other people's food. Something about her reminded him of Chloe at that age. The way she tried to make herself invisible, the careful way she held herself like she was afraid of taking up too much space. He watched Lisa approach Sophie's table with water, saw the brief conversation, and noticed how Lisa kept glancing back at the girl throughout her shift. There was something there, some connection he couldn't quite figure out. Over the next few weeks, Robert found himself timing his visits to coincide with Sophie's appearances. Every Tuesday she would show up around 3:30, always ordering just water, always with that same worn backpack and clothes that clearly didn't fit right. And every Tuesday, Lisa would somehow find a reason to bring the girl food. Robert had built his fortune by noticing patterns, by seeing what others missed. It didn't take long for him to realize that Lisa was paying for Sophie's meals out of her own pocket. He watched her ring up orders that never went to tables, saw her grab food from the kitchen when the manager wasn't looking. What impressed him most was how carefully Lisa did it. She never made Sophie feel like charity. There was always some story about leftover food or canceled orders. She treated the girl with dignity, like she was doing Sophie a favor by letting her eat the extra food. Robert had been successful in business, but he'd failed as a father. Watching Lisa with Sophie, he was seeing something he'd never learned how to do, how to care for someone without making them feel small. One Tuesday afternoon, Robert was scrolling through his phone, looking at the latest reports from the private investigator, when he heard a commotion near Sophie's usual table. He looked up to see the little girl collapsed on the floor, Lisa rushing over to help her. Robert's heart stopped. For one terrifying moment, he thought he was looking at Chloe. The same small frame, the same vulnerable way she'd looked the last time he'd seen her, angry and hurt and too proud to admit she needed help. He watched Lisa cradle Sophie's head, saw the genuine panic and concern on the waitress's face. This wasn't just kindness, this was love. Lisa cared about this child like she was her own family. When Sophie came to and Lisa helped her back into the booth, Robert could see Lisa's hands shaking as she brought the girl orange juice and food. He found himself leaning forward, straining to hear their quiet conversation. He caught fragments, something about crackers, about a grandmother who forgets things, about parents who had died. The pieces came together slowly, painting a picture that made Robert's chest tight with recognition. This little girl was alone in the world, just like Chloe was alone somewhere out there. The only difference was that Sophie had found someone who cared enough to help her, while Robert had let his own daughter slip away. After Sophie left that day, Robert stayed in his booth and watched Lisa. She cleaned tables mechanically, her usual energy gone. When she thought no one was looking, she sat down heavily in an empty booth and put her head in her hands. Robert saw her shoulders shake and realized she was crying. He wanted to go over to her to somehow let her know that what she was doing mattered. But he stayed where he was, just another customer in a hoodie, watching a woman who was better than anyone he knew in his wealthy circles. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Sophie's pale face, about Lisa's tears, about his own daughter somewhere in the dark. For the first time in months, instead of working late or having dinner at some expensive restaurant, he went home to his empty mansion and sat in Chloe's room. He looked at her pictures, at all the things money had bought her, but that had never been enough. Designer clothes, the latest gadgets, a car for her 16th birthday that cost more than most people made in a year. But when had he last sat with her over homework? When had he last made her feel like she mattered more than his next business deal? The next day, Robert did something he'd never done before. He hired a different kind of investigator. Not one to find Chloe, but one to find out more about Lisa and Sophie. If he was going to help, and he was definitely going to help, he needed to understand the whole situation first. The report came back 3 days later, and it was worse than he'd thought. Lisa was a single mother working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet even before she started feeding Sophie. She'd grown up in foster care herself, had put herself through community college, and was currently trying to save money for a social work degree she couldn't afford. Sophie's story was heartbreaking. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her with a grandmother who was clearly struggling with dementia, but was too proud to ask for help. They were behind on rent, behind on utilities, living on whatever social security payments came in. But what struck Robert most was what the investigator had discovered about Lisa's other activities. Sophie wasn't the only person she was helping. Lisa volunteered at a food bank on weekends, had paid for other families' groceries when she saw them struggling, and once gave her own winter coat to a homeless woman she'd met outside the diner. This woman was barely keeping her own head above water, and yet she was trying to save everyone around her. Robert closed the report and made a decision. He'd spent his whole life focused on making money, on building his company, on being successful. He'd lost his daughter because he'd forgotten what really mattered, but maybe it wasn't too late to do something right. He picked up his phone and started making calls. If Lisa could help people with almost nothing, imagine what someone with his resources could do. But he had to be careful. He'd learned enough about Lisa to know she was proud, and Sophie's situation was delicate. One wrong move could make everything worse. Robert had found his purpose, and for the first time in months he felt hope that maybe, just maybe, he was finally going to do something that would make him worthy of his daughter's love when he found her. Robert's private investigator, a woman named Janet who specialized in family cases, delivered her full report on a rainy Thursday morning. Robert sat in his downtown office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city he'd helped build. But all his attention was focused on the thick folder in front of him. The deeper he dug into Lisa and Sophie's lives, the more his heart broke. Lisa Thompson, 28 years old, had aged out of foster care at 18, with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to never let anyone else feel as alone as she had. She'd worked her way through community college while cleaning offices at night, graduated with honors, and had been accepted into a social work program at the state university. But life had other plans. Her 7-year-old son, Danny's father, had disappeared when the boy was 2, leaving Lisa to raise him alone. The social work program required daytime classes and unpaid internships she couldn't afford. So she'd put her dreams on hold and taken the job at Frank's Diner, supplementing her income with weekend shifts at a grocery store. The numbers in the report made Robert wince. Lisa brought home about $1,200 a month from both jobs. Her rent for their small apartment was $800. That left $400 for everything else: food, utilities, Danny's school supplies, gas for her 15-year-old car that needed repairs she couldn't afford, and now she was spending her own food money to feed Sophie. The report on Sophie's situation was even worse. Her grandmother Rose had worked as a school secretary for 30 years before retiring, but her pension was barely enough to cover the mortgage on their small house. Rose's dementia was getting worse by the month. She'd been wandering the neighborhood at night, once showing up at a gas station in her nightgown asking for directions home. The house was falling apart. The roof leaked, the heating system barely worked, and last month the water had been shut off for 3 days before Sophie figured out how to call and get it turned back on. Rose forgot to pay bills, forgot to buy groceries, forgot to take her medication. Most heartbreaking of all, Sophie was trying to hold everything together by herself. She'd been forging her grandmother's signature on school forms, lying to teachers about why she was often late or unprepared. She walked to the library after school to use their computers for homework, because the internet at home had been disconnected. Robert closed the folder and stared out at the city. In his world, problems were solved with phone calls and wire transfers. $1 billion deals were completed over lunch. But looking at these two families, he realized that all his money couldn't fix the deeper issues at work here. Still, he had to try. That same Thursday, Lisa was having the worst day she'd had in months. It started when Danny woke up with a fever, and she couldn't afford to miss work to stay home with him. She'd dropped him off at her elderly neighbor Mrs. Garcia's apartment, promising to pay her back when she got her next paycheck. Then her car wouldn't start. She'd spent $40 she didn't have on a taxi to get to work, arriving 20 minutes late to find Frank in a mood. "Third time this month you've been late, Lisa," he said, not looking up from his coffee. "I run a business here, not a charity." "I know, Frank, I'm sorry. My car broke down and save it. You think I don't notice what's been going on? Food disappearing, orders that don't match the receipts. You think I'm stupid?" Lisa's stomach dropped. "Frank, I can explain." "No explanations. You've been giving away food, haven't you? To that little blonde girl who comes in here." Lisa felt her face flush. "She was hungry, Frank. She's just a kid. And that's supposed to make theft okay?" Frank's voice was getting louder, and other customers were starting to stare. "You think because it's for a good cause you can just take food without paying?" "I did pay," Lisa protested. "I've been paying for everything out of my own tips." Frank snorted. "Right, and I suppose you can prove that?" Lisa realized with sinking horror that she couldn't. She'd been so careful to make it look like mistakes or leftover orders that she'd never kept proper receipts. In trying to protect Sophie's dignity, she'd made herself look like a thief. "One more incident," Frank said, pointing a finger at her. "One more missing sandwich, one more unexplained order, and you're gone. Understand?" Lisa nodded, blinking back tears. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Without it, she and Danny would be homeless within a month. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of anxiety. When Sophie came in at her usual time, Lisa's heart nearly broke. The girl looked even thinner than usual, and there was a new hole in her worn sneakers. "Hi, Miss Lisa," Sophie said quietly, sliding into her usual booth. "Can I have some water, please?" Lisa brought the water with shaking hands. She wanted desperately to bring Sophie food. But Frank was watching from behind the counter like a hawk. Sophie sat there for an hour, pretending to do homework while her stomach growled audibly. Finally, Sophie packed up her things and stood to leave. "See you next week, Miss Lisa," she said softly. Lisa watched her go, feeling like the worst person in the world. That evening, she drove to Sophie's house with groceries she'd bought with money she'd borrowed from Mrs. Garcia. She found Rose in the front yard in her nightgown, pulling weeds at 9 o'clock at night. Sophie was trying to coax her grandmother back inside. "Grandma Rose, it's dark. We need to go in now," Sophie was saying patiently. "But the garden needs tending," Rose replied, looking confused. "Mother always said to tend the garden before bedtime." Lisa helped Sophie get Rose inside and settled. While Rose dozed in her chair, Sophie showed Lisa the pile of red-stamped envelopes on the kitchen counter. "I don't understand all of them," Sophie admitted. "But this one says we have to pay money or leave the house." Lisa looked at the eviction notice and felt sick. They had 30 days to pay 3 months of back mortgage payments or they would lose their home. "Sophie, honey, we need to get some help. There are people who—" "No!" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "You promised. You said they wouldn't take me away from Grandma Rose. But sweetie, you can't keep living like this. Your grandmother needs medical help and you need—" "I can take care of her," Sophie insisted. "I've been doing fine. If we lose the house, maybe we can find a smaller place. I can get a job after school walking dogs or something." Lisa's heart shattered. This 8-year-old child was trying to solve problems that would challenge most adults. She was so busy taking care of everyone else that she couldn't see how much she needed help herself. Meanwhile, across town, Robert was making phone calls. He'd contacted 3 different social service agencies, trying to understand what resources were available for families like Sophie's. The answers were discouraging. Wait lists, bureaucratic red tape, and systems that seemed designed to separate families rather than keep them together. He'd also had his assistant quietly research Lisa's situation. Her landlord was known for evicting tenants over minor lease violations. Her car was on its last legs, and the social work program she'd dreamed of attending had raised their tuition beyond what someone in her situation could ever afford. But the more Robert learned, the more determined he became. These weren't problems that required just money. They required careful planning, respect for people's dignity, and a deep understanding of what each family actually needed. As he sat in his office late that night, Robert thought about his daughter Chloe. He'd tried to solve their problems by throwing money at them, buying her things instead of giving her time and attention. He wouldn't make that mistake again. This time he was going to do things right. But first he needed to prevent a disaster, because according to his sources, Lisa was one small mistake away from losing her job, and Sophie's family was less than a month away from losing their home. Time was running out, and Robert knew he had to act fast. It was a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other, but would end up changing everyone's life forever. Lisa was walking on eggshells at work, terrified that Frank would find another excuse to fire her. Sophie had arrived at her usual time, looking even more tired than usual. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights trying to keep her grandmother safe. Lisa brought Sophie water with a heavy heart, knowing she couldn't risk bringing food anymore. She watched the little girl pretend to do homework, while her stomach made hungry sounds that broke Lisa's heart into pieces. That's when the police cars arrived. 2 officers walked through the diner's front door, their radios crackling with static. Behind them walked a man in an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in Frank's humble diner. Lisa's blood ran cold. This was it. Frank had called the police about the missing food. She was going to be arrested for theft. Sophie looked up from her homework, fear flashing across her face. In her young life, police usually meant bad news. Lisa wanted to run to her to protect her somehow, but her feet felt frozen to the floor. "Excuse me," the man in the suit said, approaching Lisa. "Are you Lisa Thompson?" Lisa's hands were shaking. "Yes, that's me." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. The man smiled gently. "My name is Robert Mitchell. These officers are here to help, not to arrest anyone. Could we sit down and talk?" Lisa's mind was spinning. Help? What kind of help came with police cars and men in $1,000 suits? Robert gestured toward Sophie's booth. "Could we include Sophie in this conversation? What I have to say involves her too." As they sat down, Lisa noticed other customers staring and whispering. Frank came out from behind the counter looking confused and worried. Sophie scooted closer to Lisa, seeking protection from whatever was about to happen. "First," Robert said, looking directly at Lisa, "I need you to know that you're not in any trouble. In fact, you're probably the most remarkable person I've ever met." Lisa blinked. "I don't understand." Robert turned to Sophie. "And you, young lady, are incredibly brave, but you shouldn't have to be this brave at 8 years old." "I'm 9, Sophie corrected quietly. 9. Robert repeated with a sad smile, still too young to be taking care of everyone else. He looked back at Lisa. "For the past month, I've been coming to this diner. I was looking for my teenage daughter who ran away from home. I never found her here, but I found something else. I found you taking care of Sophie like she was your own daughter, spending your own money to feed a hungry child, going without lunch so she could eat." Lisa's cheeks burned red. "How do you know that?" "Because I was watching. I saw you pay for her meals out of your tips. I saw you cry after she left each day. I saw you care about a stranger's child more than most people care about their own family." One of the police officers, a kind-looking woman, leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell came to us because he was worried about Sophie's home situation. But he didn't want to just call child services. He wanted to make sure we could help the family stay together." Robert nodded. "I had some people look into your situations. I hope you don't mind, but I needed to understand how to help properly." Sophie grabbed Lisa's hand. "Are you going to take me away from Grandma Rose?" "Absolutely not," the female officer said firmly. "We're here to make sure you can stay with your grandmother, but that you're both safe and healthy." Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out several folders. "Sophie, your grandmother needs medical care for her memory problems. There are doctors who can help her, and medications that might slow down the confusion. The officers have arranged for a social worker to visit today, not to take you away, but to help your grandmother get the services she needs." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But we don't have money for doctors." "You don't need to worry about money anymore," Robert said gently. "I've set up a trust fund that will pay for your grandmother's medical care, your house payments, and your education." Lisa felt like she was in a dream. "I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't even know us." Robert's expression grew serious. "Because I failed my own daughter. I gave her everything money could buy, but I never gave her what you've been giving Sophie. Real love, attention, someone who truly cares. I lost Chloe because I didn't know how to be what she needed. He turned to Lisa. But watching you with Sophie, I learned something. I learned what real kindness looks like. You've been sacrificing your own well-being to help others, and that made me realize what I should be doing with my resources. The police officer smiled. Mr. Mitchell is being modest. He's arranged for a lot more than just medical care. Robert pulled out another folder. Lisa, I know you've always wanted to be a social worker. The university has agreed to let you start the program next semester with a full scholarship, and there's a job waiting for you when you graduate, heading up a new foundation that finds and helps people like you who are already making a difference in their communities. Lisa's mouth dropped open. But I can't afford to quit working. I have Danny to think about. You won't have to quit anything, Robert explained. The scholarship includes a living allowance that's more than you're making now. And there's flexible daycare at the university for Danny. Sophie was staring at Robert like he was some kind of fairy godfather. Are you really rich? Robert laughed for the first time in months. Yes, Sophie, I'm really rich. And for the first time in my life, I think I might actually be using my money for something important. Frank, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward. Lisa, I owe you an apology. I had no idea you were helping that little girl with your own money. I thought, it's okay, Frank, Lisa said, tears streaming down her face. No, it's not okay, Robert said, standing up. Lisa, you'll never have to worry about losing a job for helping someone again. And Frank, I'd like to talk to you about sponsoring meals for kids who need them. There are probably more children like Sophie who come through here. Over the next few hours, everything changed. The officers accompanied Sophie home to meet with her grandmother, Rose, and a social worker who specialized in keeping families together. Rose was frightened at first, but when she understood that people were there to help her remember her medications and take care of the house, she broke down crying with relief. I've been so scared, Rose admitted to the social worker. I know I forget things and I was terrified they'd take Sophie away. But I love her so much. No one's taking Sophie anywhere, the social worker assured her. We're going to make sure you both have what you need. Meanwhile, Robert sat with Lisa at the diner, explaining how the foundation would work. You'll help me find other people like you. People who are already helping others but need support to do more. Teachers buying school supplies with their own money. Neighbors checking on elderly people, anyone who's making their community better. Lisa wiped her eyes. Why me? There must be plenty of social workers you could hire. Because you understand, Robert said simply. You know what it's like to struggle, to have to choose between helping someone else and taking care of yourself. Most social workers learn about poverty from textbooks. You've lived it. 6 months later, Lisa walked across the stage at her university graduation, with Danny cheering from the audience and Sophie holding a bouquet of flowers. Rose was there too. Her memory improved with medication and the stress of daily survival lifted from her shoulders. Sophie had gained 20 pounds and was now at the top of her 4th grade class. She lived with her grandmother in their newly renovated house, with a part-time aide who helped Rose with daily tasks and made sure Sophie had everything a child should have. Lisa had found her calling, running Robert's foundation and helping dozens of families across the city. Every day she went to work knowing she was making a real difference in people's lives. As for Robert, he never did find his daughter Chloe through his searches in diners and shelters. But 3 weeks after helping Lisa,